My name is Ethan Walker, and the day my boss fired me for something he did was the day I learned how fragile power really is. Before I tell you how a single meeting cost me my job and nearly my reputation, let me ask you something. Have you ever been blamed for a mistake you knew you did not make, and realized too late that the system was designed to protect the wrong person? If that question hits close to home, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from, because stories like this survive on shared experience. I had worked at Hale Solutions for 8 years. I started as a junior analyst and worked my way up to senior project manager through long nights, missed vacations, and a reputation for being dependable when things went wrong. Richard Hale, my boss, liked to call me his right hand in meetings, the person he trusted to execute what he envisioned. That trust, I would later realize, only existed as long as I was useful. Richard was charismatic, confident, and deeply allergic to accountability. He loved big promises and hated paper trails, which meant I often found myself documenting decisions he preferred to keep verbal. I did it instinctively, not out of suspicion, but out of habit. In my line of work, details matter. The project that changed everything was a high-profile contract with a regional healthcare network, a deal that would make Richard look brilliant if it succeeded and bury us both if it failed. He pushed aggressively to accelerate timelines, cut compliance corners, and approve vendor invoices before final audits were complete. I raised concerns in private. He brushed them off with a smile and said, "That's why I have you, Ethan. To make it work." The night before the quarterly review, I sent Richard an email outlining the risks again, attaching updated reports and requesting written confirmation for the expedited approvals. He replied 2 words, "Handle it." That email would later matter more than I could have imagined. The following week, everything exploded. An internal audit flagged discrepancies in the vendor approvals, compliance froze the project, and senior leadership demanded answers. Richard called me into a meeting with HR and legal without warning. I walked in thinking we were there to explain the situation together. Instead, I was handed a printed report highlighting my name on approval logs. Richard leaned back in his chair, his expression grave. "Ethan acted outside protocol," he said calmly. "I trusted him, and that trust was misplaced." I felt the air leave my lungs. "That's not true," I said, my voice steady despite the shock. "Those approvals were final," Richard interrupted. "And your responsibility." The HR director, Laura Bennett, looked between us, clearly uncomfortable. "Ethan," she said, "did you authorize these payments?" "Yes," I replied. "With Richard's instruction." Richard sighed, shaking his head as if disappointed. "I never approved bypassing compliance," he said. "I would never risk the company like that." The meeting lasted 20 minutes. By the end, I was informed that my employment was terminated effective immediately for gross misconduct. Security escorted me to my desk to collect my things. Colleagues avoided my eyes. Some looked confused. Others looked relieved it was not them. As I walked out of the building, my badge deactivated mid-swipe, I realized how quickly a narrative can be rewritten when the right person speaks first. That night, anger tempted me to call everyone I knew, to post online, to defend myself loudly. I did none of it. I replayed the meeting in my head, not to wallow, but to map the damage. Richard had not just fired me. He had positioned me as the scapegoat to protect his image. But in doing so, he had underestimated one thing. I had documentation. Emails. Reports. Time-stamped approvals. Notes from meetings where his instructions were clear, if not formally written. Over the years, I had kept records because it was my job to be thorough. Now, those records were my lifeline. The next morning, I contacted an employment attorney. She listened without interrupting, then asked one question that told me everything. "Do you have proof?" I opened my laptop. "Yes," I said. As we reviewed the emails, her expression shifted from cautious to confident. "He thought firing you would silence you," she said. "Instead, it freed you." Meanwhile, Richard went on a quiet campaign. I heard through former colleagues that he told people I had gone rogue, that he was shocked and disappointed, that the company had dodged a bullet. He assumed I would disappear, grateful for a severance package designed to buy my silence. He did not know I had declined it. Declining severance raised eyebrows, triggered reviews, and forced conversations he thought were finished. 2 weeks later, I received a call from Laura in HR. Senior leadership wants to revisit the audit, she said carefully. They have questions. I agreed to meet, not as an employee, but as someone with information. Walking back into that building felt surreal. The same conference room. The same chairs. Richard sat at the table, composed, confident, until he saw me. His eyes narrowed for a fraction of a second. Why is he here? He asked. Because I asked him to be, Laura replied. The CEO joined the call remotely. Ethan, she said, you've raised concerns through counsel. We'd like to hear them. I placed my folder on the table, sliding copies of emails forward. I acted on direct instructions, I said calmly. Here is the correspondence. Here are the approvals. Here is the timeline. Richard opened his mouth to speak. The CEO raised a hand. Richard, she said, you'll have time to respond. As the documents circulated, the room changed. Richard's confidence eroded, replaced by calculation. He had assumed his authority would outweigh my evidence. He had assumed wrong. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply told the truth, knowing that truth, when properly documented, does not need volume to be heard. And as the meeting drew to a close, I realized something else. This was no longer about my job. It was about accountability. And the ace I held was not revenge. It was proof. The meeting did not end with raised voices or dramatic accusations. It ended with silence, the kind that grows heavy when authority realizes it has stepped onto unstable ground. The CEO thanked me for the documentation and said they would conduct a full review. Richard nodded stiffly, his jaw tight, offering a practiced half-smile as if professionalism alone could hold the walls in place. I left the building again, not escorted this time, and sat in my car for a long moment, letting the quiet settle. I knew better than to assume justice would arrive instantly. Systems protect themselves before they correct themselves. Over the next several days, the company initiated what they called a comprehensive internal audit. Former colleagues reached out cautiously, asking if I was okay, if the rumors were true. I kept my responses brief and factual. I had learned that clarity, not commentary, was my strongest ally. Richard, on the other hand, began to unravel in small but telling ways. He scheduled unnecessary meetings, sent late-night emails clarifying decisions no one had questioned before, and requested copies of documents he should have already had. Each move revealed anxiety. He knew the narrative was slipping out of his control. A week later, I was asked to provide sworn statements and additional records. I complied. The auditors noticed patterns quickly. Approvals clustered around Richard's directives, compliance warnings dismissed minutes after his messages, verbal instructions that aligned too neatly with outcomes he publicly denied. The ace I held was not a single smoking gun, but a mosaic of truth. Piece by piece, it showed intent. Meanwhile, Richard attempted a counteroffensive. Through legal counsel, he claimed I had misunderstood his directions, that my emails reflected initiative, not instruction. The problem was his own words. Phrases like push it through, we'll clean it up later, and I'll take it upstairs if it blows back do not age well under scrutiny. In a follow-up meeting, the CEO asked him to explain those lines. Richard tried to reframe them as jokes, as pressure-induced shorthand. No one laughed. As the review widened, it pulled in compliance officers, finance managers, and vendors. Invoices were re-examined. Calls were logged. Timelines were rebuilt. With every layer peeled back, Richard's version of events grew thinner. He began to isolate himself, canceling meetings, delegating decisions he once hoarded. People noticed. Power, I learned, is most visible when it starts to retreat. Then came the call I had been waiting for. Laura from HR asked if I would return for a final session with senior leadership. When I arrived, the room felt different. Less formal. More honest. The CEO spoke first. Ethan, she said, the findings confirm that you acted under direct instruction. Your termination was unjustified. She paused, then added, We are prepared to reinstate you with full back pay. I thanked her, genuinely, but did not answer immediately. There's more, she continued. Richard Hale has been placed on administrative leave pending further action. I nodded, absorbing the weight of it. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully, but before I decide, I need to understand what accountability looks like moving forward. The CEO met my gaze. It looks like consequences, she said. Later that afternoon, the announcement went out internally. Richard's access was revoked. His projects reassigned. His title stripped of authority while the investigation concluded. The office buzzed with a restrained shock. Some people looked relieved. Others looked afraid. No one celebrated. When a system corrects itself, it rarely feels triumphant. It feels necessary. Richard called me that evening. I let it go to voicemail. His message was strained, defensive, laced with disbelief. We could have handled this quietly, he said. You didn't have to take it this far. I listened once, then deleted it. He still believed the scale of the response was my choice, not the result of his actions. A few days later, the board concluded the review. Richard was formally terminated for misconduct and referred to regulatory authorities. The news traveled fast, not because I spread it, but because accountability has a way of announcing itself. The company issued a public statement acknowledging procedural failures and outlining corrective measures. My name was not mentioned. That mattered more than people realize. Vindication does not require spectacle. It requires accuracy. When the CEO called again to confirm my reinstatement, I declined politely. I'm grateful, I said, but I've accepted another opportunity. It was true. A partner firm, having heard of the audit through professional channels, had reached out. They wanted someone who documented decisions, who asked hard questions, who did not flinch under pressure. I accepted their offer on my terms. As I closed that chapter, I thought about the day I was fired, how small and powerless I felt walking out of that building. What changed was not my competence. It was my willingness to let the truth work without my interference. The ace I had up my sleeve was never revenge. It was patience, preparation, and proof. And as I stepped into a new role, I understood something deeply. When power abuses silence, evidence speaks. And it always speaks louder than fear. The morning I walked into my new office, the city looked sharper somehow, as if clarity had changed the way I saw everything around me. The building was smaller than Hale Solutions, less polished, but there was an honesty to it I hadn't realized I had been missing. People greeted each other by name. Meetings began on time and ended with decisions written down, not implied. It felt like oxygen. My new role was challenging, demanding in a way that required precision rather than obedience, and for the first time in years, I felt respected not for how much I absorbed, but for how clearly I thought. News from my former company continued to surface quietly. Richard's termination was followed by regulatory reviews, vendor renegotiations, and internal policy changes that should have existed long before my dismissal. Former colleagues reached out with apologies for their silence, some admitting they had known something was wrong but had been afraid to say it. I listened without judgment. Fear is a powerful silencer, especially when rent and reputation are on the line. One message stayed with me. A junior analyst wrote, "Watching what happened to you made me realize documentation isn't paranoia. It's protection." I replied with a simple thank you, because that lesson mattered more than sympathy. Months later, I ran into Richard unexpectedly at a conference I almost skipped. He looked older, thinner, stripped of the authority that once filled a room before he spoke. When our eyes met, he hesitated, then approached. "I didn't think you'd be here," he said. "Neither did I replied calmly. He shifted, searching for familiar ground. "You really appended everything," he said, not accusing, not apologizing, just stating a fact. "I didn't," I said. "I told the truth. The system did the rest." He nodded slowly, as if that explanation finally made sense. "I thought firing you would end it," he admitted. "I thought you'd move on quietly." "I did move on," I said. "Just not the way you expected." We parted without bitterness, without closure rituals, without the need to define the moment. Some stories don't end with reconciliation. They end with understanding. That night, as I reflected on everything that had unfolded, I realized how close I had come to losing more than a job. If I had accepted the severance, signed away my voice, or let anger drive my response, the narrative would have remained intact, just false. Instead, I chose restraint. I chose evidence over emotion, patience over panic. That choice changed the outcome. If you're listening to this and you're standing in the aftermath of an injustice, wondering whether speaking up is worth the risk, remember this. Power depends on silence more than it depends on strength. The moment silence breaks, power has to answer for itself. Keep your records. Trust your instincts. And never assume the truth is powerless just because it is quiet. Thank you for staying with my story until the end. If it resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments, like this video, and subscribe for more cinematic stories about accountability, resilience, and the quiet victories that change everything.